So I'll let Jerry take it away, and then he'll, I'm sure, show some stuff. And then, but if there's questions, please, ask stuff. If you want to talk about specific areas, we can touch on those and go from there.
Right,
cool.
Exactly. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just finishing updating these licenses for, as long as we're looking at it, right? For the rack extensions, and I imagine everybody here knows what they are. Our solution to everyone asking us for VSTs, I guess. Yeah, continually.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, Propellerhead doesn't normally go down the road you think they're going to go down. If you ask for audio tracks, you're going to get a new program called Record, which couples invisibly and amazingly with Reason itself. And it was a brilliant solution in its way, and Record was a great product for many people. But, there's different marketplace forces than there are. I mean, what can be construed as a good product with a target market and for the right person, et cetera, can simply die in the marketplace due to not just pricing things, but being perceived a certain way. And Record was perceived as a limited tool. And we live in the land and the times of every tool must be world dominating in its bloatware ability to do everything for everyone. And so we live in that, and yet people complain about not knowing how to use their tools because there's too much in the way of everything. So we thought an appliance, in a sense, like Record, that was great for a person who actually recorded audio tracks, wanted the SSL mixer kind of quality on their sounds with its great tracking ability as well. And then not so much of the thousands of synth patches for EDM people, but no, you're actually a guitarist or a pianist and you're actually singing. But anyway, that kind of consolidated and focused package is sort of contretemps in a way. So even though it would boot up as one program with Reason and give you everything you wanted on both sides of those divides, it was hard to digest because you couldn't point to an Adobe product that did it. Or when you're explaining it, it was all like, well, you've never seen this before, but trust us, it works. That's kind of hard to convey in a world where there's less time to understand and explain things. So we merged them as of Reason 6, which you probably know, so that all the capabilities. But that's a good example of us maybe overanalyzing what's a great solution to give audio to our. And I think maybe in a sense rack extensions is too. We looked at all the formats out there, all of which were at least a decade old, and looked at the problems that they had as much as the wonderfulness that they offer, the problems that they had, and especially in terms of reliability for host like ours. And that's why I think Ernst and the designers just were loath to involve third-party plugins on a format where people could cohere to 80% of that format and no more, and therefore have lots of incompatibilities with your software. So rack extensions are kind of a brilliant solution, but they're not VSTs. They become, let me just bring one in. If you know, everyone here knows what the Reason rack is, and you know what devices are. Like if I bring in a pulverizer, it's this unit that has a back panel, etc. These are citizens of the rack that we've invented for Reason. Well, now if I bring in, and I'm going to use the new browser here, if I bring in another effect, let's say, and this time it's not from us, it's a rack extension from, let's just say, Cakewalk. Bring that in. And we turn it around. It's the same kind of device. There's no learning curve on how you use it. There's no new browser to figure out because it uses our browser. There's no new automation style to figure out because it uses our automation. There's no new interface paradigm, which might be brilliant but takes you all weekend to sort of come onto, and maybe you do need it. So it's, again, this focused idea that it's simply a device. And for a developer, on the developer side, it's only, do you have DSP? And can you do the graphics for this? Because everything else is handled by the host. So when Apple goes to the next OS or Windows, or Apple goes back to Motorola chips, whatever, you never have to write that plugin again or that rack extension again. You use the low-level virtual machine code that you give us, completely protects the developer. We can't even read it. It also means it's future-proof. It means that code will work no matter what. We will update Reason, And in that context, it'll always work. So we were thinking, wow, on the development side, we're improving. We're making something better that developers don't have to return to. Oh, my God, Apple has a new version of this OS, and now we have to get back to work on that same old plugin and make it compatible. And the user doesn't have to go, I would love to update Pro Tools, if only then, but my favorite plugin I can't use then, and now I have to wait for this and keep track on the forums about everything, meanwhile not making music. And I guess that it always boils down to that for us, is like, are you spending time working with your hard drive, figuring out its odd personality, or are you actually making music? And in our meetings at Propellerheads, that's the philosophy, are you making music rather than operating your computer? And so when some DAW companies actually refer to their users as operators, and it's actually true when you see what they have to go through. You have to do some of that with Reason or any software, but we try to minimize it. Okay, that's like the philosophy statement I've made. But it informs everything we do. And so some people are like, well, why do you invent the rack? You know, just do the damn VSTs we asked you for. But there's reasons, and these are reasons that we think are pretty important. Plus, in our shop, which is basically just like the App Store, you know, we keep 30%, we give 70% to the developers, right? They're free to market their products the way they like. You can try any of these things for 30 days, right? Really easily. Somebody sends you a file and you're collaborating with them and they use something from SoftTube that you don't have. Well, you can play the file and you can actually then use the SoftTube plugin while you're reviewing their file. Nothing is barring you from anything. And if you like it, you can go buy it. So there's a lot of friendliness that's not like when you get a file from someone, it's like, where's this file? Where's this file? Where's this device? You know, where's this? You can't open it. So anyway, that's why we do things differently. And I think it keeps us with a really focused group of people who like that approach. And the whole notion, just to go on with philosophy for a second, the whole notion of closed and open, I think, is an important one for musicians too. Before rack extensions, you knew what you had in your Reason package. And when you went to work on it, you knew that tool set. And you pretty much, when you reached for an EQ, you didn't review the 20 in your plugin list of which EQ should I use for this particular change I want to make. You can go to the mixer and make a great change on the SSL mixer. Just do it and get it over with kind of thing. I think with a tool set you know, you might get more music done. But the virtues of the open system we all know really well. It's just a garden of unearthly delights, and everyone wants more, of course, all the time. And so there's the definite trade-off. It's a bit like Apple and the Windows world, right? Back in the day, where the closed system of Apple was making decisions for you, but you were getting a lot done creatively. So anyway, let's look at some files that I was showing the other day. And now I should be able to open anything I want. So let's go over to the browser. The browser now, if you want it to be, is always present. Before, the browser in Reason was an ugly open dialog box that was like a rabbit hole you had to dive down, like many browsers. And it got you away from your screen, your music, and what you're doing. And so we found that workflow ultimately was interruptive. And I think that's one of the reasons Reason has lots of tools on the screen instead of hunting in menus up here, where is that feature? It's simply before you on the screen. So for example, we're known for tempo control, artifact list, tempo change of audio, but it's nowhere in a menu. You won't find that feature. I've had people call me up and say, that thing you showed in the demo, it's not in my program. And I'd say, well, you're right, it's not in any menu, but just go while you're playing that file to the tempo and change the tempo. And if you didn't know so much about computer music, you might do that and just figure, well, of course it's going to change tempo. And you wouldn't even think it was a feature, because you wouldn't even have heard that digital audio didn't do that very well. So it's that kind of simplicity and non-dialogue boxy kind of approach. So that's why the browser's there. And that's a huge part of Reason 8 release, is the workflow advantages of having every patch and everything at your disposal. In this case, I was simply, before my speech, I was going to just open a song. So let's open up this, because it's rock and roll, it gets down to basics, and it shows some of the new devices too. But literally on the browser, as we play this, I'm going to be able to drag and drop from there, effects patches, Rex loops onto pads, right here in the sequencer screen. So let's just start by soloing just this. I think I'm up pretty much. All right. Okay, so that's just your drum track. Now if I'm in this screen and I want to go and say, well, maybe that's not really the track that I'd like to hear. I'd like to hear this song with many other tracks. I'm making my mixing decisions. I'm going on, I'm dragging patch after patch either into Octarex or some reverb or some other track to do it. And I'm really quickly, instead of diving into that rabbit hole of the old browser, I'm really being able to preview these things automatically that I want to do. That's lots less clicks than our other system, and I think the system that exists in lots of other softwares. So that's a huge part, and this is just one example of how to do it. If I go to the if I happen to be in this screen, I can do it similarly. Now, what we learned in our last go-around was lots of our users just don't even go to the sequencer window. It's kind of hard to imagine. But as you see in the sequencer window, these drums don't actually have a track. It really is just that Octarex that's on run. So you can imagine a user that loves this playground, and they stay there, but they don't even want to go to the mixer. They want this drum to be louder or softer, but we gave them a fader here. This is part of a Reason 7 change, right? And we actually think that they don't need to go to the mixer at all. And we can just brighten that up a little bit in the mids and do that right there. And they're back in the rack that they love, because somehow how they imagine all this music happening is not left to right linear tracks, as people I think who record audio typically think of it as. But it's just these loops that are happening that they're building up, and they're creating a sound in a garden of what they prefer. So these workflow things mean less motion, less moving away, less typically clicking around, more changing sounds and changing your work and what you do. So I think we had the second video for Reason 8 is called Workflow. It starts with the Wikipedia version of a definition of what a workflow is. And I think for everyone in this room, that's going to be a slightly different definition. But I think ease, facility, fluency, focus, maintaining focus, and productivity are all part of what you think of as good workflow, ultimately, no matter what tool you're using. So that's a big part of what we're doing here. A lot of the pieces are in place. It used to be that integer releases of Reason always had new devices. I mean, I can remember Reason 5. I think there were 5 new main features and or devices there, like Kong and Octarex and things. But then came along the rack extensions, and at this point we have 200 and something in the store, and some from us and many from third parties. So we started seeing adding devices to new versions as maybe not the important thing we needed to be working on, but rather how the program feels to use. More things in the sequencer, more things that reflect the usability of it. Anyway, so notice also we have these 2 ways to mute and solo, and you probably already know that because you know the program, but it confuses some new users a little bit. I can mute and solo in the sequencer, and I can mute and solo in the mixer. That's a little bit of a stub your toe maybe scenario where you don't understand what's happening unless you know that that's true. But like in this case, when I return to my 2 soloed parts, because I'm working on these together, when I went to the rack, I really wanted to focus on just those drums. And when I turn that solo off, it doesn't blast it out into the whole song again. I'm just back hearing the parts that I want to hear. So anyway, let's go up to the amp part, because here's one of the new devices actually that is part of Reason 8. And the truth of the matter is Line 6 no longer feels that they will be supporting the devices in the future. In other words, every time we come out with a version, they have to dedicate engineering development to to these units, but we're not going to drop them from the program for some years, perhaps a year or 2 years. Nonetheless, we got to get replacements in there because people are used to having this function in. So we talked to the guys at SoftTube. I don't know if you know their plugins. They make VSTs. They make really high-end stuff. They make things that look like this. Something just like looking at them. And they make my voice sound really good, better than it should. So I love them. I'm in instruments. Okay, let's go to effects here. A Swedish company as well. Yeah, so this piece. I'm a bossa nova singer, and I didn't start singing until a few years ago. But without the FET compressor as my singing partner, I just don't sound as good on, I was going to say on tape, but I guess because it makes me feel like I'm on tape. And certainly for my guitar, when I'm playing guitar, and that's a classical guitar that I lovingly and carefully process, I would be lost without this piece, the Trident EQ. These are just high-quality audio devices. And so I know the company more from this production point of view, not from, oh, these are rock and rollers that'll make great killer boogie amps or whatever. But they actually, that's where they come from. That's where they started. Like many of us, they started in amp land before going to component land. So let's look at the amp that they made for the guitar here. Turn on this track, and this is actually I stole this from the very first Guitar Rig 1 install I did, where they had a folder of tape deck content, and it's a bunch of unaffected bass and guitar tracks, and they had this track in there, and I always liked it because it was so normal, kind of unspectacularly basic, like a bologna sandwich of rock. So it's an unaffected guitar, and that's what you want to show this amp in. It's funny, I need glasses for my resolution on here, but here you can see that there's different settings here and different cabinets here. They made different overall settings to go to, twang, crunch, rock, lead, and what's that last one? I can't read it there and I can't read it here. That's really funny. Oh, bypass, no wonder. No wonder it didn't, recognize, it seemed like a rock and roll killer word. It's never on bypass. Anyway, so those are your 4 basic settings. And then you have just, it must be hard to read from back there too, because it doesn't look that great. Gain, bass, mid, treble. I can't read that either. This is funny. Oh, right, the most important, the fact that you have power amp gain. How could you do Pete Townsend imitations if you weren't able to push the power amp into the speaker alone? So that's a big part, and when I actually use this amp on other instruments, that's what I'm using there when I don't really want fuzzy crunch, when I don't really want that less defined sound, but I do want a sound of tubey power. That's what I use the power amp gain for. So you can make those settings on any of these basic settings. And to give you an idea what they sound like, let me just play the track using, let me return to snuff on all of these, including volume. So this is their twang setting, right? It's like Creedence Clearwater Revival or something. And you can put that through different cabinets. And you have the different characteristics of, and you can bypass that and just get you know, if you were going to go direct into the desk without a cabinet and that's the sound you wanted, then that's what you would use. Or if you're going to actually take this out of your system and put it into a cabinet. But so that's what happens. You get different cab models with different settings. So if I move over to Crunch, and just to see what these are again: bright, room, fat, tight, and bypass. So those are those. Obviously, gain is going to give me how much I'm pushing into the device. And you have your preset, classically preset. I have to find out what the frequencies are, but I don't think it matters so much. Want to push your mids like you can on some Fenders. And then a really interesting feature on a guitar amp, so kind of like you got the mop out, you're using a gate to probably, you know, you need this not when you're soloing your track. You know you need this when you're playing your track with the other instruments, because you want the essence of this part and the dynamics of this part and the rhythm of this part. And it's almost like the user can extrapolate the result better. But by cleaning up that residual sound and gating, the enveloping each of those chords, you get a lot more of a clean delivery. You might want the full wash, but chances are you might use that. But I've just never seen anyone put it on a guitar amp. Lots of bass amps have compressors and gates, but anyway. And then you can also boost. So this is the heavy duty, I don't care anymore. You can just flip the switch, make the call, kind of thing. Again, you got rock. Maybe clean it up a little by also, I'm realizing that in this part, I did this thing in Reason where I took these last two chords and I changed them because the bass part, this bass lick I found had two different chords at the end of it, and so I needed two different guitar chords. So I took the razor tool and cut that chord out, and I transposed that down 2 steps, and then I took the last little bit there and I untransposed it. So I didn't want this whole thing done. That's how I matched it with the guitar part. I'm realizing it's not the original part. So anyway, that's your lead, of course, is going to give you a hella amount of less shape, maybe. Yeah, it suffers a little. Most gates give you a release control. So if you had a real, you just go to the SSL console and here, use that gate, use the release if you really want to tuck this in. But especially on this sound, now you can hear the hand actually come up from the guitar a bit before he goes back down. And if you don't do that, you just feel like he or she is just hitting the chord. So on this particular heavily sustained sound, that's probably I would use that on this part. Potentially, unless it's the opening of the song, it's the only thing you hear, in which case you want the glory, the power and the glory to both come through. And then we could just also audition the cabs. That's nice. Which one is that? That's the room, okay? Let's go to fat. Yeah, now let's go down. I can just keep this thing on and always see what I'm doing. Wow, those cabs just really completely trump these controls. Yeah, tight is a little bit more like that. What's that company in New York that has been making for years these direct pedals that sound really, boxes that sound really good? Zoom competed with them. It sounds a little bit more like that, like you've got a direct kind of situation with some more balls in it. Yeah, anyway, so you get a lot of sonic capabilities. Again, you know, any of these pieces of software that give you lots of possibilities, they can also confront you with an interface that's difficult to find your way in. And it's always a balancing act, especially with something like a guitar amp that one thinks of as a simpler device than many, right? There's usually not that many parameters. So what are the least number of parameters that give me the greatest amounts of tones, right? And so here, sort of presets on the, or at least, not benchmarks, what do we call them? Starting places on the cab side, starting places on the distortion algorithm side, and then your controls down here that help you shape them. And that's all. You know, the more you overdo that, you potentially lose people making good sounds with the. You also know what sounds good and bad about your algorithms, and so you can also protect people from that, right? If you have a certain interface that guides them to the best models and the best combinations, then your piece will sound better. I didn't talk to SoftTube about making this, but that's in the end what it boils down to, making a useful device that's virtual, where the possibilities are endless, but you don't want to make your mistakes in that endless possibility zone. I mean, that's what, first of all, Reason is not about that. Other programs do that really well. So let's see what's on the back panel here. You know, I've never seen this magnifying window before, and I'm just so happy. It's, yeah, so gates and gain controls. Yeah, so you could take something like any of our controller CV devices, or out of any, I think every Reason device has some control voltage output. And you can drive the gain knob. You can have one chord in that. On 2 and 4, your chords just crunch better. And in the rest of the part, they don't need to crunch that much. So you just take your controller, a synchronous would do it, and you just on 2 and 4, just bump the amount you send to the gain, and then all of a sudden, this device, that guitar part, is pumping with whatever you're doing rhythmically, according to the BPM. So that's one of the advantages of having Reason devices have these. You wouldn't think of a guitar amp as needing some CV control on the back panel, but and then controlling the gate as well. So that gate setting, remember, different ways that the player plays. Yes, you really want the gate, and then the very next measure, you don't want that gate. So having the ability to automate that, turn it on and off rhythmically, perhaps, is really necessary. And then, of course, like any Reason device, any of these are, let's see, create track for amp 1. So on the further automation level, now I have a track for amp 1. And when I go up here to see, well, what is it that I can automate about that particular device? You know, it could be the cabinet switch, in which case, you know, you go in there and you start making different, you know. Now, one thing that would be better, I would say, would be really nice, because I do this kind of thing a lot. Be nice to that it knew that I'm doing the cabs, and then on the left, there's a little bright, rock, you know, tight, all the names of the cabs, and I don't have to sort of wonder which one it is. I know what order they go in, and there's only 4 before bypass, which I wouldn't use. So then, anyway, this is going to then change that switch as I play it back. And what I typically do is get these, set it on something. I'll show you a good example of this. And then pump them in on the rhythm that I want to do, and then I just open up each one and say, no, 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 you're switching to that device. And then, okay, you're good on the next one, and no, you're switching back to that other device. Or I could copy-paste that one. I do that just as long as we're on the subject, and I think I have the window. I do this in this other file that I have. Where is it? Reason 8 Demo 1. All right, there we go. It's funny that the rock and roll file didn't do this. You know, this is more of a coolio digital file. But what it does do that is cool is that Audiomatic is changing its presets just in the exact same way that I showed you controlling those amp cabinets. So So the washing machine is changing to the cracked, changing back to washing machine. I do that half because it looks cool, and half because it actually sounds cool too. Half and half. But yeah, I must have a record track open in there. So any questions about amp? You know, you don't have to use it just on guitar. What's true about all those kinds of instruments is a lot of times, of course, because it's sitting there, you have your drums or percussion open and you wonder, instead of the saturation knob or something else that would seem to be studio-esque and therefore that's what you should put on drums, why not the guitar amp? And so it's completely open for you to do that with and keep boost on all the time. Now the other device that comes with that, because Line 6 will also be surrendering their bass amp, is the bass. So let's just turn to that for a second so you can see what those parameters are, and I'll just take this out of here. Okay, so right, this was also tape deck content from Guitar Rig. So let me go into here, take the solo off here, and go down to this bass track. There's the actual bass, right? It actually sounds like a bass. And then we're going to take it off bypass. Similarly, modern and vintage are the two basic model types you have. And then you have different cabs, dark, bright, and room, affording you pretty big changes in timbre. Yeah, like very picky, which is a picked part anyway, yeah. So let's see these. Does that mean transistors and tube? Maybe that's a little more latent. This is pushier. It's more modern, is all I know. But this has a little more kind of that sloppy thing. The nicest thing I think about this amp is this mid-range thing, where you get a selectable. Probably is annoying, huh, to change the parameter and have it wiggle like that. This won't happen in your program. Again, you know, usability and interface. Why not make it fully parametric? Why not make it so that I could sweep that? You know, it's a really good question. Somebody made a choice for us here based on their understanding of what, in each case, each of the cabs matched with both of the models, what are going to be the most either classic, useful? I mean, it's a decision made for us. Is it better or worse? I don't know. I like the choices they made. But again, it's a... and how do I find my way back to 3 if it's really a sweeping thing? Then I have to automate it and know what the exact setting had been. And if I didn't automate it, would I just turn it to go back there? Well, 3 will always be 3. Anyway, those are the issues. I can also turn the treble up and just create presence in a bass part by turning ultra high on, where I really pick up that pick a lot more. Similarly, if I really want to you can't hear it on the tonic note, but when it goes for the fill, in that part you can hear the ultra low really kick in. That's interesting. So those are its virtues. High quality, very simple to use, and I think these don't even have patches yet. So we're releasing the software on Tuesday, and so Lots is still arriving, and I think that he just did the patches session last week, so refining those. But similarly, there'll be a gobbledygook of patches, and I imagine for other instruments too. What I did do with my classical guitar, because I found that I couldn't really use it with the soft tube guitar amp, and it's no bossa nova room in there anyway to do anything with that amp. But on the bass side, doing the classical guitar with the bass amp on certain settings really sounded nice, really made the guitar sound a bit bigger, and especially I play it live one of these they call it Gypsy King styles, but it's just the guitar is this thin instead of the full classical. And so, of course, you lack some formant size there. But the bass amp really helped that to sound more substantial, sound more like a solo instrument instead of something I do for convenience live. So I noticed that already, but I'm sure there's other uses. Bass amp might ultimately be more useful as a processor with other instruments than the guitar amp, which is super focused on its task, you know.
So we got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's other stuff you want to cover or questions people might have, or if there's some other things, or whatever you think, or rack extensions.
Yeah, I would answer questions. I think, yeah, rack extensions. The most recent one we made, which I think is an amazing piece, and it's a remarkable deal as well. Yeah. I only want this, actually. So if you have the same old patch that comes up on Dr. Octarex every time, and you put on Pulverizer, and the truth about these devices, Pulverizer, Echo, and Alligator that were introduced with Reason 6, those are actually rack extensions. And those are the proof of concept devices we made in rack extension format to prove to ourselves and others that, oh, this is going to work. This is going to be a great idea. So we made them, Mats Karloff, who's coming here later in the day, made these 3 devices in like 4 months before release of that. We needed some help right away, but because the format helped him work that fast. So Pulverizer is one of those, it's actually a rack extension, even though it doesn't call itself that. Okay, then there's Synchronous that comes later. So Synchronous is, I think it's $39, $49 in the shop. It's a control device where you can draw any shape you want, and it loops in any loop length you want. And it can control either its own effects, distortion, filter, delay, and reverb, or you can send out the back panel to other effects, like your FM synthesizer, have ratios change in rhythmic ways, right? And so that gets to be like, oh, instead of just the LFO from Subtractor I could send somewhere, now I've got this beast of a modulator effect that I can send anywhere. And just with these drums with internal effects, let me kick it in just to give you. Yeah, stuff like that, where you can really take that same old dog-eared beat and make it quite different. So, yeah, I think that the browser kind of explains itself. It's there, it's always there, and it's super drag and drop for anything that you want. Samples onto the sampler map, or anything that's possible you can imagine, you can drag and drop into your session, all, of course, while it's running. So that's a huge change. And then the graphics and everything changed. We went to this flat look after years of being in dark mode and other high contrast things. The transport bar is completely different. I mean, I think, in fact, if I showed a list of things that changed, they're all infinitesimal, but there's about 50. You can double click to create notes and edit modes, and hard things to talk about in a short demo, but lots of little changes. The look, the browser, and the 2 new amps are pretty much what we did, workflow stuff. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, yeah.
How's the licensing work for this new version?
It's the same as 7, where we pulled the ignition key out. You don't need that. So now your choices are, when you go to your account, you can authorize a computer. So what I tend to do is authorize my laptop, because that's more likely to be on a bus, train, boat, plane, something that I always want to work, no matter what. Then at home with my desktop computer, I either use internet authorization, and both of those can work at the same time, or I use my key on a third computer, and then I can have all 3 of those authorized at the same time. So one user can really, by getting the ignition key, have 3 computers at the same time working with full auth. Yeah. And actually, Sweetwater's selling a hell of a lot of ignition keys, and I think that's what they're doing. They're really smart there. They upsell Reason people, and they say, well, there's a lot of Reason you can still use an ignition key. You don't need it per se, but in fact, it can help you. Or the other thing is, you go in with an ignition key to a studio, and you have your file with your song file, and you have the guy download the demo of Reason, and you put your ignition key in, and it's immediately authorized for his computer in the studio, and all your rack extension licenses live there too. And so now all of a sudden, during that setup, when the drummer is getting his thing in the room set and the mics are being set up, you're actually setting up that computer to be very much like your computer at home, because you brought your ignition key, and your whole personality sort of is on there. And then he opens up your song file and continues to work on it in the studio. So that's another good use of an ignition key. Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys for coming. It's really nice.
Very much.